I'll start with the fact that both US President Donald Trump and the Russian dictator Putin made statements, as did Peskov, Putin's mouthpiece, even went so far as to refute President Trump's words. This is where we've ended up in the current twists and turns of international politics and international relations. And now we'll talk about all of this. So the first thing that needs to be said is that the enemy continues to put pressure on the front. Russian troops are continuing their offensive, but they are not achieving significant success. Ukrainian forces are managing to stabilize the situation. I would like to draw attention to the fact that for the past 6 months, Russia has been spreading propaganda, claiming that they are about to enter the Dnipropetrovsk region, that they are already there. However, lately, they have stopped doing this because they are not there, because there are risks of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups entering, and the Ukrainian defense forces understand this and are taking measures to prevent it from happening. This is an important point. Similarly, the enemy's offensive actions in the Sumy region have been halted. Moreover, as soon as opportunities arise, our forces, in fact, employ maneuver defense measures in order to carry out, among other things, counter-offensive actions. This is the second point. The next point that needs to be mentioned. Right now, there are a lot of messages appearing online claiming that Russia can destroy all of Ukraine with Shaheds, bomb, strike our territory however it wants, and nothing will happen to it. Well, first of all, that's not true. Let me start with the last point, that nothing will happen to it. It will be. Because there should be no doubt that Ukraine's defense and security forces will strike military targets on enemy territory. This is essentially our asymmetric response to the enemy's actions, to the terror they are carrying out. That's the first point. We just need to understand that when we emotionally want this to happen right here and now, and as often as possible, that's understandable. But in order to prepare special operations of the web level, well, I won't even get into that right now, because it requires lengthy preparation. And here it's important to understand that approaches constantly need to be changed, because the enemy adapts to certain actions and starts preparing ways to counter them. That's why it's always necessary to be creative, to change approaches, and to adjust the implementation and execution of these operations. Secondly, regarding the strengthening of air defense systems, first of all, there is a constant process of summarizing and analyzing how the air defense systems are currently operating, analyzing how the Shaheds are flying, how best to shoot them down, how they change altitude, how they establish communication, which in some cases might not be intercepted by electronic warfare systems, the so-called spoofing, and then methods of counteraction are developed. This includes anti-aircraft drones, and not only those. And this is exactly what Ukraine constantly appeals to its partners about. Right now, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, together with a team from our security and defense forces and the government, are making efforts to ensure that more air defense systems start appearing in Ukraine, which will make it possible to shoot down Shaheds. But there are already certain decisions that will be implemented soon. And of course, it's also about striking the factories that produce Shahedzi. Completely agree with this, and such decisions are being prepared. By the way, it's possible that Russia may transfer some of its production facilities to North Korea. At the very least, there is information that another large factory will appear in Korea. This is the largest factory in the country, in North Korea, for the production of weapons. It is likely intended specifically for Russia. In other words, Kim Jong-un is ready to become a major rear factory for Putin. It is likely that this was once again negotiated by Shoigu, who recently visited him. Shoigu wanted to get infantrymen with weapons in their hands, but instead Kim is giving him sappers and construction workers who are supposed to help with the reconstruction of the Kursk region, as they mentioned. In other words, Kim does not want to send soldiers into the meat grinder, but he's ready to help with factories. And so North Korea is preparing to build one of the largest factories in Ukraine amid increased arms supplies to Russia. This was reported by the publication NK News. During his visit to Chagang province, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inspected the project for one of the country's largest military factories, whose area could exceed 5 to 10 hectares, which is twice as large as existing production facilities. As the publication notes, according to satellite images, demolition work has been underway on the site of the future factory since May to create a larger facility. Kim Jong-un also stated that the new complex will serve as the foundation for the creation of advanced engineering equipment, capable of ensuring a leap forward in the development of the DPRK's defense industry, Kim noted. Production will focus on intelligent, fast, and precise machine tools. It's interesting, where will they get them? Well, most likely they are counting on China, which will probably supply these machines. I think there can be no doubt about that. So we see that North Korea is trying to squeeze out the maximum benefit for itself. And as for Putin, he's in a situation where he has nowhere else to turn. Now he will be asking Kim Jong-un for help as well. But aside from that, Ukraine is also looking for options and is also cooperating with partners so that weapons are produced on NATO territory, both for us and jointly with our manufacturers. There are already successful examples of this, and there will be more. It's important to understand that, in principle, the necessary work is being done. And to wrap up this topic, I can say that the guys I talk to in various areas really do say the situation is tough. But a lot is being done so that despite shortages of people or equipment in some places, the enemy is still being held back effectively. In other words, the front is holding, which allows other defense units to prepare and ultimately carry out successful strikes on Russian territorial asymmetric response. Meanwhile, the internet was shaken by a video and photos of the so-called doomsday plane. Right now, there's a lot of talk about this. You know, in the past time, maybe many people didn't even know these planes existed, or only specialists, analysts, and so on knew about them, or those who are simply interested in this topic. But now, more and more information is appearing about the fact that these kinds of planes are flying. At one point, people saw Benjamin Netanyahu's plane supposedly over the Mediterranean Sea, Prime Minister of Israel. Now monitors have shown that it landed at Andrews Air Force Base, which is located near Washington and is the main air base for American presidents. And that's where the Boeing I-4B arrived. It landed there. This event is noteworthy, as analysts point out, because the last time something like this happened was after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. In general, the aircraft is used to govern the country in the event of a nuclear threat and can remain airborne for about a week. Yes, that's actually a fact. The plane landed. Perhaps it had flown before, but it did not attract such close attention. But undoubtedly now, against the backdrop of the events taking place in the Middle East, and we talk about the possible use of nuclear weapon, supposedly Iranian, although there is currently no definitive evidence that Iran possesses nuclear weapons, IAEA Director Grossi denies this. The United States, let's say, does not state this affirmatively. They say they're getting close to it. By the way, CNN published speeches by the current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, from 1996. And in this chronology, Netanyahu talks about how Iran is on the verge of acquiring a nuclear bomb. Well, if that were the case since 1996, Iran should already have become a powerful nuclear state by now. Where this nuclear weapon is, however, remains unknown. Perhaps it really is hidden somewhere deep in the Iranian mountains. Maybe that's possible too. And one day it will be found or destroyed. That's also an option that remains. Well, and the situation in the Middle East is escalating. Israel continues to carry out strikes. It should be said that the strikes by the Israeli Air Force are quite successful. They are effective. Israel is indeed conducting an effective air war. It is clearly visible that the intelligence is working in a coordinated and effective manner in those places where they can reach, and they really have a certain advantage in the air over Iranian skies. I don't know if the entire air defense system has been destroyed. Probably not, because after all, it was announced the day before that Iran had shot down an Israeli drone, an analog of the Reaper, but American made. Still, well, we can see that there is an advantage. At the same time, information has emerged, published by both the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, that Iran has chosen a war tactic, a tactic where it tries to launch all their missiles, bringing out everything old it has, in order to exhaust Israel's air defense system, and then supposedly it will strike with its newest missiles. What was flying and what was shown online, like that air jellyfish or whatever else you might call it, well, there was nothing particularly new or advanced about it. Israel successfully shot down this missile in the sky over Iraq. They handled it well, but, well, this is just an element of intimidation. But these are not the newest missiles that Iran claims to have in its arsenal. There are others as well. But to be honest, it was, let's say, impressive from a certain point of view. We have to understand that the war is also being fought in the information space. The attention of the media now, social networks, many people have mobile phones, although there are now reports that the internet has completely disappeared in Iran. And, well, that's basically how it is. So it's generally difficult there now to carry out any actions related to spreading something online. But for example, the Wall Street Journal has reported that it's running out in Israel. And President of the United States, Donald Trump, has made many statements. He said that the US demands the complete capitulation of Iran. The American leader stated that he urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to continue striking Iran. At the same time, Trump noted that he has not yet decided whether America will strike Iran. And he said that he does not know whether the assistance will increase. In other words, he said that the assistance should be, well, actually somewhat more limited. And he does not know whether the US will provide greater support. And as for when asked whether America would carry out strikes, he said, maybe yes, maybe no. Quite informative, of course, but by the way, the same question was asked to Pete Hegseth, the head of the Pentagon, during the congressional hearing. He was asked about it, and understandably concerned, he said that this information is classified and that they would discuss it in the closed session. That's understandable, because this is unfolding here and now. But he was asked whether the United States would strike because this concerns US security and is worrying people. And why does this concern the security of the United States and its people? Because the point is that Iran is threatening to strike American bases in the region. There are currently about 40,000 American troops stationed in the Middle East at air bases in Qatar, in Bahrain, and in other locations, including Jordan, where they are present. And accordingly, if Iran starts striking these facilities, the American military will have a choice depending on the orders they receive, either to engage in combat and carry out a ground operation, which will inevitably lead to more American troops being drawn into a major war, a very large war, or to withdraw from there. Withdrawing from there would mean, well, not exactly a Trump-style Afghanistan, but definitely very serious reputational risks and downsides. Against the backdrop of the midterm elections to Congress, this would be, well, a major thumbs down, and it certainly wouldn't motivate Republican voters to support them. And in fact, as reported by The Economist, basically right now, as of today, the question is essentially being decided whether the US will strike using a B-2 stealth bomber with a Tsar bomb. What in the former USSR, Khrushchev used to call the Tsar bomb. In the United States, this is the GBU-57 aerial bomb, weighing 13,600 kilograms, which is designed to penetrate well-fortified structures. Israel is openly calling, both in its media and generally on social networks, for America to strike the Fordo facility, which is located in Iran and may be the main site, the primary platform for uranium enrichment for future nuclear weapons. Well, among Trump supporters, among MAGA, there are concerns that Such actions could drag America into yet another long war, and the situation in the Middle East would turn into real chaos. Oil prices would skyrocket, the economic situation would significantly worsen, and they are advising Trump not to do this. That's why he's thinking, yes, indeed, there is a certain redeployment of American troops being observed. Aircraft carrier groups are operating. But I want to remind you that even after October 7, 2023, well, in fact, such aircraft carrier groups were operating. At that time, President Biden sent them to guarantee and ensure security. The Americans are now justifying this by saying that they want to directly shoot down more Iranian missiles and provide assistance to Ukraine-necessary Israel. Well, it wouldn't hurt for Ukraine either. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said that he supposedly spoke with the Russian dictator Putin, and during this conversation, he essentially urged Putin to first sort things out in Russia before talking about mediating in the Middle East. It seems like he put Putin in his place a bit. I wish he would put him in his place regarding Ukraine, about his war against Ukraine, because Putin in turn gave an interview in which he said that he wants the war to end as soon as possible. And he wants Trump to make efforts, that is, to support Trump's initiatives. Such complementary language. Well, that's basically it. But Trump perhaps so much wants to talk more often with the Russian dictator Putin that he even made a slip of the tongue and made a mistake when referring to their last conversation, because he said it was yesterday. And Peskov, Putin's press secretary, said that in today's world, events are so dynamic that you can forget what happened. And he said that Trump was referring to the phone conversation that took place with Putin last Saturday. So basically, he mixed up the dates a bit. Why not? Things like this happen. But why did he stay there? Maybe he really did want to talk more, but just forgot. Ah, well, that's how it is. Meanwhile, the leader of Iran, Khomeini, recorded an address. It was read by an announcer on Iranian television. Khomeini himself wasn't there, which immediately raised questions. A lot of questions arose. Is he even alive? Because information was spreading that Israel had carried out precision missile strikes on buildings and residences where Khomeini might have been staying. Accordingly, questions are being raised. What happened to him, and why isn't he appearing in person? Maybe it's just security measures, or maybe it's something else. He said that if America intervenes in the war, it would be a big mistake. Iran will prepare a response and essentially threatened American facilities located in the region. At the same time, Reuters reportedly reports that Iran has apparently recently approached the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom with a high-level diplomatic request for a meeting and negotiations in Geneva. They are reportedly ready for such meetings in Switzerland. Well, of course, that's possible. But the question is, if there are no representatives from the US at these meetings who could potentially launch strikes against Iran, and the point of them is unclear for now. Well, we'll see how it unfolds. But that's the situation as it stands. For now, it seems that China is probably helping Iran the most, since, according to the British publication The Telegraph, it was Chinese cargo Boeings that were flying to Iran. What they were transporting or what they were taking out of there is also unknown. And as for Russian planes, they haven't been observed. And as always, Putin abandons his allies. That's absolutely typical of him. Meanwhile, an interesting piece of news appeared in Reuters. Reuters, citing its sources, reports that supposedly the special representative for Ukraine, General Nick Kellogg, is planning a visit to Belarus and intends to meet with Lukashenko. According to Reuters, Kellogg plans to visit Belarus in the coming days to meet with the self-proclaimed President Lukashenko. And according to two sources, the exact agenda of the meeting is unknown. Although Kellogg has reportedly described this trip in private conversations as a step that could help launch the process of peace negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. They have declined to provide any official comments. Let me remind you that in 2020, there was the last high-ranking representative of Belarus. At that time, it was US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Why is Kellogg planning to go now? It's unclear. Perhaps he wants to convey some kind of message to Putin in this way. Although, what is there to convey if they are basically communicating directly with Trump? Or maybe he's trying to offer something to Lukashenko to get him ready. Or perhaps Lukashenko wants to slip away from Putin. In other words, there are many factors. Or maybe these are steps toward establishing some kind of cooperation and interaction that the US has talked about. But I think that for Ukraine, it's absolutely unacceptable, and there can be no talk of any new Minsk formats or anything like that. Of course, that's not going to happen. And besides, we shouldn't forget that the Zapad 2025 exercises are supposed to take place. Maybe Kellogg wants to talk to Lukashenko about avoiding provocations. Well, it's actually strange because, you can talk as much as you want. But if negotiations are already taking place in the US directly with the Russians and with Putin, and Trump is talking, then why do they need Lukashenko? What could Lukashenko possibly convey to Putin? Or, on the other hand, what could Kellogg discuss with Lukashenko in Belarus that Putin wouldn't find out about? That's also a question. So we'll wait and see. And in the meantime, an interesting piece of news has come up. It's both interesting and concerning because the publication Clash Report reports that Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, allegedly stated that NATO intends to classify information about the aid planned to be delivered to Ukraine. This raises questions. The motivation seems clear and it sounds rational. They say it's so that the enemy doesn't find out what's being delivered, in what quantities, and so on. Well, that makes sense. But why wasn't this done from the very beginning when our partners were supplying these weapons? That's the question. And secondly, under the current circumstances, this already starts to raise certain doubts. Perhaps NATO countries want to obscure or, let's say, conceal information about a potential reduction in aid to us. Personally, I wouldn't want that. And I think you feel the same way. I wouldn't want our partners to reduce this aid. But ultimately, that could also be part of their motivation. Meanwhile, well, although we need to look at the expenditure items and the decisions that have been made, perhaps this is also related to the fact that more and more decisions are now being made about production, joint production of weapons. And so they don't want to disclose specific data because Russia has carried out hybrid attacks, including arson on the territory of some countries, including Germany, targeting military factories and so on. So we'll see. It will be necessary to carefully analyze the range of aid, the various funds allocated, and only then draw final conclusions on this issue. Well, the British publication The Guardian wrote that the Ukrainian delegation was dissatisfied with the fact that Trump left the G7 early and that many issues could not be discussed, including those related to joint weapons production, increasing air defense supplies to Ukraine, and the fact that Ukraine is ready to purchase these weapons. But there is a chance that the presidents might meet at the NATO summit. However, whether a meeting between Zelensky and Trump will actually take place during the NATO summit in The Hague will depend firstly on the situation in the Middle East, and secondly, on the mood of the US president regarding how the Europeans respond to the call to increase defense spending to 5%. By the way, this is perhaps the only thing really worth supporting. Indeed, right now, in the calls from the United States to increase spending, that's a fact. Europe needs to take the initiative into its own hands, especially Germany as a strong European economy and a true European leader, to coordinate more with Ukraine, to create more together and to move forward. So there is a chance for such a meeting. They may be minor at the moment because it is still unknown what Trump's schedule and agenda will be during the NATO summit next week. But still, well, it will be quite a difficult situation, I think, and things are complicated, but he might come at least because if the US is planning some kind of operation against Iran, then historically, whether it was when the US participated in the war against the former Yugoslavia or the campaign in Iraq or the campaign in Afghanistan, the US has always tried to secure the support of its partners, no matter what. Therefore, how Trump will behave at the summit, what discussions will take place, and how packed the agenda will be could also indicate how he is preparing for events, for developments in the Middle East, and possibly not only there, since the issue of the Arctic remains on the agenda. Even though Greenland is being talked about less now as the representative of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Cherniak rightly noted in a comment, the US and Russia are preparing to strengthen their military dominance in the Arctic. I support this point of view and have repeatedly said that in fact, Russia is building up military infrastructure, and with global warming, there is now the prospect of extracting many valuable resources and minerals, and in fact, strengthening its military presence for this purpose. That's why Trump also wanted to increase the presence in Greenland. And there is already a confrontation between Russia and the United States because Russia is claiming two-thirds of the Arctic unilaterally, as always disregarding the positions of the United States, Canada, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, which are Arctic states. So let's see how events will unfold here as well.